Pauline stood completely frozen in the cramped kitchen, her knuckles white as she tightly gripped a pathetic, half-empty box of cheap pasta and 3 small eggs. Through the paper-thin drywall, her husband's wealthy guest was whispering loudly to her husband. "They couldn't even put out cheap cold cuts. It breaks your heart." The brutal pity in that whisper was a crushing public humiliation and a massive slap in the face. 31 proud years working as a highly skilled laboratory technician, meticulously testing quality control at the massive dairy plant. And now she was reduced to this suffocating, hidden poverty. Her entire life's hard graft had completely vanished. Have you ever felt totally stripped of your basic dignity inside your own home? Tell us in the comments. Where are you exactly from? And does your basic social security check actually stretch to the end of the month? Hit that like button right now so this vital story reaches everyone terrified of the crippling cost of living. Because what this desperate grandmother did next didn't just silence the patronizing whispers, it totally shattered the rules, turning her absolute financial ruin into a brutal, unstoppable cash-generating enterprise. The phone rang at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. By the violently shaky tone of her daughter Lena's voice, Pauline instantly knew it was a desperate plea for cash. Her 16-year-old grandson, Tyler, was failing his crucial math exams, completely mixing up basic formulas. A private tutor cost a staggering $400 a month. Lena was surviving on a miserable teaching assistant salary and was begging for help. $400. Pauline stood by the freezing kitchen window, staring blankly at the bare, black trees outside, and ran the brutal household arithmetic. It was the terrifying survival math of a retiree completely scraping the barrel. Combined Social Security checks, roughly $2,600. Rent for the damp apartment, $975. Medicare copays and Vicks expensive knee cream that the doctors stubbornly refused to cover, $310. Sky-high winter heating bills and utilities, $380. Groceries, nearly $700, which meant strictly making ends meet by surviving on massive bags of store-brand oats, clearance sticker chicken, the cheapest watery milk, and eggs bought by the half dozen. Total remainder for 2 human beings to live on for 30 days, exactly $160. $160 for absolutely everything else. Clothes haven't been bought in 3 miserable years. The dripping bathroom tap remained permanently broken. And now, Lena was begging for $400. Pauline muttered a flat promise to think about it and hung up the phone. Thinking about it simply meant staring at a terrifying negative number and staying completely silent. Telling her stressed daughter a flat no meant telling her struggling teenage grandson to just do without. Vic sat slumped in the freezing living room, wearing faded sweatpants, loudly rubbing his painfully arthritic knees. He blankly stared at the television screen without turning his head. $400? We can barely afford to eat. Let the boy study at the public school for free, exactly the way normal people do. Vic, his massive exams are in 2 months, Pauline argued. And I became a damn engineer without a fancy tutor. Pauline tightly gripped the doorframe and didn't bother arguing. Arguing with a bitter man whose joints throbbed and whose wallet was completely empty was like screaming at the rain. You can do it, but the miserable forecast will never change. She stepped back into the tiny kitchen and firmly closed the door. It was a cramped 6 by 8 space, featuring a rusty stove, an ancient fridge, and a scratched table by the drafty window. On the chipped windowsill sat 6 large glass jars, each one actively doing something remarkable. In one jar, thick bubbles rose slowly to the surface. In another, chopped vegetables violently shifted colour from bright orange to deep amber and from beet red to dark cherry. The metal lids trembled faintly, exactly as if what was trapped inside was actually breathing. Because it was incredibly alive. Bacteria, lactobacilli, complex lactic acid fermentation, the precise biological process that forcefully transforms an ordinary cheap carrot into something entirely different. Deeply sour, aggressively crunchy, with a sharp ginger bite and a profound depth of flavour that strictly appears on day 3, when the hungry bacteria eagerly eat the sugars and start violently producing acid. Pauline intimately knew this complex chemistry from the inside out. 31 long years as a senior lab technician at the massive regional dairy plant, recording daily pH readings, titratable acidity, and exact bacterial counts per gram. This was her true working language, her native alphabet, her unique way of perfectly understanding the entire world. It had all started 3 depressing months ago with a thick library book called The Art of Fermentation, checked out from the local public library simply because the colourful cover featured a picture of vegetables tightly packed in a jar. Pauline had been instantly drawn to it, the exact same way a retired concert pianist is drawn to a dusty piano sitting in someone's quiet living room. The heavy book turned out to be deeply scientific, heavily detailing bacteria strains, complex enzymes, strict temperature curves, and exact incubation times. Pauline eagerly read it and instantly recognized her own forgotten language, the precise language of the clinical lab, completely unused for 7 miserable years since her forced retirement, but still deeply stored in her tired body. It was stored the exact same way swimming is permanently stored in a person who hasn't been in deep water for a decade. The physical body vividly remembers. Ever since that day, the tiny kitchen had magically become a strict testing lab. Carrot mixed with sharp ginger, precisely grated, exactly 20 grams of salt per kilo, rigorously stored for 3 full days at exactly 20 degrees Celsius. Thick beetroot heavily mixed with strong horseradish, roughly chopped, fermented for 5 full days, producing a violently sharp smell that aggressively forced Vic to angrily slam the kitchen door shut and completely open the freezing bedroom window. Cabbage thickly covered with bright yellow turmeric, an acquired, highly debatable taste. Every single scientific experiment went straight into her battered notebook. It was a cheap, graph-ruled schoolbook filled with her tiny, meticulous handwriting. Exact date, specific ingredients, strict ratios, precise room temperature, daily clinical observations, and final result. Carrot plus ginger, batch number 7, 1 kilogram, 20 grams salt, 10 grams grated ginger, 3 days at 20 degrees Celsius. Day 2. Bubbles extremely active, smell deeply sour but pleasant. Day 3. Completely done. Taste intensely sour, sharp, perfectly crunchy. Final rating 8 out of 10. On Thursday morning, a chatty podcast played loudly on Pauline's battered phone. She listened intently while slowly stirring her cheap, watery oatmeal. This specific habit had completely replaced the heavy, suffocating silence Vic used to fill with boring weather reports and endless complaints about the neighbour's overgrown lawn, back when his ruined knees still allowed him to comfortably walk to the front window. A cheerful woman from Portland was loudly boasting about selling homemade kombucha she brewed in her tiny kitchen. She started with 3 miserable bottles, now sold 80 a week, and pulled in a staggering $1,500 a month. "It's not just a business," the wealthy woman arrogantly said. "It's a vibrant way of being totally alive." The podcast host eagerly agreed. Pauline stood completely frozen, with the wooden spoon dripping over her cheap oats, and fiercely thought, brewing kombucha is totally allowed. Baking bread is allowed. Making jam is allowed. Then what on earth was wrong with selling fermented carrot mixed with ginger? She slowly looked at the crowded windowsill. 6 massive jars, aggressively bubbling, quietly brewing, rapidly changing, and finally saw them for the very first time, not as a pathetic retiree's hobby, but as a highly profitable commercial product. She quickly grabbed her phone and searched, "Farmers Market, local pitches." The massive Saturday market in the town centre ran every single weekend year-round. New independent vendors were welcome. The first trial week was completely free. She nervously dialed the number. "Saturday market, good morning." "I would absolutely love to book a pitch. I have premium fermented vegetables, safely stored in glass jars." "What is your registered farm name, madam?" "No farm. Pauline Marsh. Poor retiree, working from a tiny kitchen." The friendly woman on the other end laughed warmly, completely recognizing the desperate hustle. "You are officially booked in. Saturday, 9 in the morning, booth number 27. The pitch is yours. Good luck, Pauline." She had exactly 2 frantic days to quickly prepare 12 massive jars, accurately figure out a profitable price point, desperately find a heavy-duty bag that could safely carry 10 pounds of thick glass, and definitively answer the ultimate question: what exactly was her hard work genuinely worth? She eagerly opened her battered notebook. Cost per large jar: cheap carrots, 80 cents. Fresh ginger, 60 cents. Sea salt, 10 cents. Jars are fully reusable. Total raw materials, $1.50. Directly below it, she boldly wrote, "Retail selling price, $12. She aggressively underlined it twice with her blue pen, the exact same way she used to fiercely underline critical results in the strict lab log when the final number really mattered. $12. 5 jars meant $60. 10 meant a massive $120. If she simply sold 8 jars on Saturday, that was $96. In 4 quick Saturdays, that was almost $400. Tyler's expensive tutor would be completely paid for. Saturday morning finally arrived. Pauline carefully packed the 12 heavy jars into a thick canvas tote bag, heavily padded with clean dish towels, and nervously took the early public bus into town. The bustling market was located inside a long, drafty concrete pavilion. Endless rows of cheap folding tables filled the space, and the incredible smell of freshly baked artisan bread, heavily mixed with expensive smoked meats, and something sharply herbal from a massive table piled high with dried organic lavender. Her designated pitch, booth 27, sat at the very end of the 3rd row, pushed hard against the cold concrete wall. She was sandwiched next to a loud woman selling homemade hand pies and a heavily bearded hipster whose expensive honey jars featured professionally printed gloss labels with exact lot numbers and scannable barcodes. Pauline nervously looked at his slick corporate labels, then slowly looked down at her own, handwritten strips of cheap notebook paper, tightly taped to the metal lids. She intensely felt the massive, humiliating distance between a pathetic amateur hobbyist and a slick professional. A harsh gap, easily measured in expensive font size and premium adhesive. She quickly arranged her 12 jars and sat down heavily. She propped up a ripped piece of cardboard with black marker pen. $12. And she waited. For the first excruciating hour, absolutely nobody stopped. Crowds of people walked blindly past, briefly glanced, slightly slowed down, and swiftly moved on without buying. The loud pie woman aggressively sold 4 massive pastries in 10 flat minutes. The bearded honey man smoothly moved a tiny jar of premium buckwheat honey for $9. Pauline sat completely still and deeply felt what cynical Vic had ruthlessly predicted that very morning. Pure, suffocating shame. It aggressively rose in her tight chest exactly like burning acid reflux, and was just about as genuinely useful. Then a young woman abruptly walked up, Mid-30s, wearing an expensive athletic jacket and carrying a reusable canvas tote plastered with a preachy ecology slogan. She leaned down and closely read the handwritten label. Fermented? Is this a genuine live culture? No cheap vinegar, no harsh pasteurization? Completely live, Pauline stated firmly. Strict lactic acid fermentation, carefully monitored for 3 full days at exactly 20 degrees. Absolutely no artificial preservatives. Verified lactobacillus count, minimum 10 to the 6th per exact gram. The young woman's eyes widened in pure shock. 10 to the 6th? Are you an actual scientist? Senior lab technician, Pauline proudly declared, and her tired spine instantly straightened with absolute pride. Commercial dairy plant, strict quality control, 31 long years of service. The impressed woman immediately bought 2 massive jars, carrot and beetroot, $24. Pauline shoved the crumpled bills deep into her apron pocket. That empty pocket, which had previously held absolutely nothing but rusty keys and a dirty tissue, instantly became much heavier by $24. It was the very first real money she had proudly earned in 7 miserable years of forced retirement. She made 2 more vital sales right before the market finally closed. A quiet man buying a gift for his wife, and an older woman who eagerly tasted the sour carrot with a cheap plastic fork borrowed from the loud pie lady. She tasted it and loudly gasped, "Wow, incredibly crunchy and so wonderfully sharp. I have genuinely never seen anything like this in a proper supermarket." Total daily takings, 3 sales, $36. Minus the bus fare, $3.50 for the long round trip. Net profit, $32.50. 9 totally unsold heavy jars rode sadly home in the canvas tote, loudly clinking against each other at every single brutal pothole on the terrible roads. It wasn't a massive fortune, but Pauline grabbed her pen and wrote in her clinical notebook that very evening. Saturday, 1. Sold, carrot plus ginger, 1. Brand new customer, will they return? TBD. Beet plus horseradish, 1. Cabbage plus turmeric, 1. Trial buy, highly unlikely to repeat. Total takings, $36. And directly below that, she proudly wrote, "The woman specifically asked 10 to the 6th? Absolutely nobody has ever asked me a question like that while sitting at my miserable kitchen table." She firmly closed the notebook and stared at the remaining jars sitting on the windowsill. Aggressively bubbling, entirely alive. She fiercely thought, $32 is definitely not 400. But $32 is certainly not 0. And absolute 0 is exactly what she had this time last week. Second Saturday. The woman in the athletic jacket came back, smiled. "More carrot and beet for my friend," she asked. 4 jars, $48. By closing, 5 sales total, $60. Third Saturday, 8 sales, $96. The carrot ginger was the runaway, ordered twice as often as anything else. Pauline noted, cabbage plus turmeric, 1 sale in 3 weeks. Drop. Try batch number 9, cabbage plus garlic plus dill. The notebook was turning from a recipe diary into an instrument. A map she followed, the way she'd followed experimental data at the plant, where a series of tests either converged on a result or didn't, and you adjusted. On the windowsill, among the new batch, the fermentation jar with the airlock lid, $18 at the hardware store, the one splurge. Inside, carrot with ginger and honey, batch number 8, experimental. Pauline checked it every evening. Tilt, watch the bubbles, sniff through the valve. Sour sweet with a honey undertone, the honey softening the acid and deepening the flavour. In the notebook, batch number 8, honey, 15 grams per kilo. Day 4, taste. Sour, mellow, sweet finish, ginger in background. Rating 9 out of 10. Potential bestseller. She sent Lena $400, first tutor payment. Lena saw the transfer, called, "Mum, where'd this come from?" "From carrots." Lena was quiet because "from carrots" sounded like a joke, and jokes don't send $400. Tyler started sessions, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Pauline, sending each payment, calculated. $400 was 33 jars of carrot ginger, each jar 1 hour of tutoring, each carrot grated at 6 a.m. one math problem Tyler might now get right. Vic saw the numbers, the notebook lay open on the table, and grumbled less. Instead of "who needs sour carrots," came silence. And silence was his way of saying, "Maybe I was wrong," without actually forming the sentence. Phone orders started, 10 to 15 jars a week from repeat customers who couldn't make Saturday. Pauline handed them out at the market. Customer came, picked up, paid. The smoothest part of the week. No bargaining, no explaining. Then Dee, neighbour, 1 floor down, 65, retired bookkeeper, the kind of woman who tracked everything. Who slammed doors, who played music past 10, and especially who smelled like what. Dee rang the doorbell on a Wednesday evening. "Pauline, what is that smell from your apartment? My place smells like a pickle factory. My husband thinks the sewer backed up." "Fermentation, Dee. Vegetables culturing. Beneficial bacteria." "I don't care if they're beneficial or pathogenic. It stinks." Pathogenic. A word Dee had clearly heard at the doctor's office and saved for moments requiring authority. Pauline closed the door, stuffed a towel in the gap, and thought, the smell was the price the whole building paid, and sooner or later Dee would recruit allies. Vic, informed by Dee the next morning, Dee knocked just for a second and stayed 12 minutes, erupted for the first time in weeks. "I told you, from the start, playing scientist on the kitchen counter. Now the neighbours complain, next it's the landlord, then what? Eviction?" Pauline didn't answer. Went to the kitchen, closed the door, sat among the jars. 25 ready, labelled, waiting. The market was working, the phone was ringing, and Vic's fear, of Dee, of the building, of embarrassment, was real. And real fears deserve respect, even when they're wrong. Saturday 4. Pauline was setting up jars when a man in a market staff jacket and a woman in a coat with a clipboard approached. "Good morning, routine check. Your marsh? Fermented vegetables?" "Yes." "Cottage food permit?" "No." "pH test certificate on your products?" Pauline was quiet. No permit, no pH certificate. She had a dairy plant ID badge in a drawer and 31 years of knowing exactly what pH fermented vegetables should be. But knowing and documenting are two different countries, and she was standing in the wrong one. Ohio cottage food law requires a permit for direct-to-consumer sales and pH documentation for acidified or fermented products. Without them, you can't sell here. You have 1 week, next Saturday, to present documentation or the booth goes to someone else. They left. Pauline sat behind 25 jars and a cardboard sign and felt the floor tilt. The pie woman. "Pauline, they do this every month. Get the paperwork and you're fine." The honey man said nothing. He had paperwork. Sympathy for competitors wasn't in his business plan. Pauline sold through the day. 11 jars, $132. But her hands worked while her head counted. Cottage food permit, $25 online. pH testing. The county extension lab at Ohio State did it for $15 per sample. 3 samples needed, 45 total. Turnaround, 3 to 5 business days. Saturday was 6 days away. Dee found out, Pauline never learned how, and spread it through the building chat with embellishments. Fined. Shut down. Health hazard. Vic, who'd been tolerating the kitchen lab with the grudging patience of a man who sees money coming in, snapped. "Didn't I say? From day one. Now there's fines. From what money? My 12.20? Pauline, quit this nonsense before we end up in court." Court was an exaggeration, and Pauline knew it. But she also knew Vic was scared. Of the fine, $50 to $200 for a first offence, not thousands, but on their budget, $200 was a week of groceries. Of Dee's gossip. Of the building knowing. And scared people yell. And yelling isn't argument, it's alarm. And the correct response to an alarm is not shouting back, but fixing the problem. She didn't answer Vic, went to the kitchen, opened the notebook to a clean page and wrote, "What's needed?" Pulled out her phone, searched slowly. Small screen, small letters. And after an hour, the picture assembled. Cottage food permit. Ohio allowed home production of acidified and fermented vegetables for direct sale. Online application, $25. Approved in 2 to 3 business days. Needed. Food safety training. Online, free, 2 hours, certificate printed at home. And a list of products with ingredients. pH testing. The Muskingum County Extension Office, affiliated with Ohio State, tested food products for $15 per sample. 3 samples, carrot ginger, beet horseradish, cabbage garlic dill. $45 total. Results in 4 business days if submitted Monday. 45 plus 25, $70. Pauline had the money, from the market earnings from the 12-jar weeks that had been building a small cushion between her and the old arithmetic of subtraction. $70 was 6 jars of carrot ginger, a lot in her math. But without it, no market at all, and no market meant the arithmetic would rewind to where it started. Negative, negative, negative. Timing. If she submitted samples Monday morning and filed the permit Monday afternoon, and if the lab processed in 4 days and the permit came in 3, by Friday she'd have both. Saturday. Booth 27, legal, documented. And Dee could write whatever she wanted in the building chat. Monday morning, Pauline packed 3 jars. Carrot ginger, beet horseradish, cabbage garlic dill. Wrapped them in towels and rode the bus to the extension office on Main Street. The building smelled of soil and printer toner, and the woman behind the counter, mid-40s, lab coat, pen behind her ear, looked at the jars, then at Pauline. "What are we testing?" "Fermented vegetables, 3 varieties, pH and lactic acid bacteria count, for cottage food compliance." "Producer name?" "Pauline Marsh, Home Kitchen." The woman wrote, weighed, labelled. Pauline watched her handle the jars with the professional care of someone who tests 100 samples a week and treats each one the same, and felt a recognition so specific it made her chest tight. This was her world. The lab coat, the pen, the labels, the quiet procedure of measure record store. 31 years of mornings that started at this exact counter, in a different building, with a different coat, but the same motions, the same smell of reagent and clean glass. She stood in the doorway for a moment after paying and let herself miss it. Not the job, but the certainty of a lab, where every question has a test, and every test has a number, and the number tells you whether you're right. That afternoon, she sat at the library computer and filed the cottage food permit online. 2 hours of food safety training, storage temps, cross-contamination, labelling requirements. Material she'd taught new hires at the plant for 2 decades. Finished in 40 minutes. Certificate printed. Permit application submitted. Pauline Marsh, fermented vegetable products, home production, Zanesville, Ohio. 3 days of waiting. The jars on the windowsill bubbled as always, indifferent to bureaucracy. Vic drank his tea in the living room and didn't mention the market. Dee passed Pauline on the stairs Wednesday and said, "Still smells." And Pauline said, "Still fermenting." And Dee's face suggested she'd expected an apology and received a weather report. Thursday. Email from the extension office. Sample results attached. Pauline opened the PDF on her phone, squinting at the small screen, and read, Carrot ginger, pH 3.8. Beet horseradish, pH 3.6. Cabbage garlic dill, pH 3.7. All below 4.6, the safety threshold for acidified foods. Lactic acid bacteria, above 10 to the 6th per gram in all 3 samples. Safe, clean, documented. Pauline sat at the kitchen table and looked at the numbers. pH 3.8, 3.6, 3.7, and felt the specific relief of a scientist whose hypothesis held. She'd known the pH would be safe, the way she'd known every batch at the plant would pass, because the process was right, and the process doesn't lie. But knowing and proving are different comforts, and the proof on the screen was the one that mattered. Friday. Cottage food permit approved. Email, PDF, printed at the library for 20 cents. State of Ohio. Cottage food production operation. Permit hashtag CF-2024-08817. Pauline Marsh. She taped the permit to the inside of the notebook cover, alongside the pH results, and closed it. Saturday was tomorrow. Saturday morning. Booth 27. 25 jars, each with a new label. Not notebook paper this time. Pauline had spent Thursday evening designing them. White cardstock, printed at the library, cut with scissors. Marsh ferments, handcrafted, live culture. Carrot plus ginger. And on the back, in small type, Ohio Cottage Food Permit, hashtag CF-2024-08817. pH tested 3.8. Produced by Pauline Marsh, Zanesville, Ohio. The honeyman glanced at her labels and nodded, one professional acknowledging another without a word. The market inspector came at 10. Same woman, same clipboard. Pauline handed her the permit and the pH report. The inspector read, checked the permit number against her tablet, looked at the jars, looked at the labels. In compliance. You're good. 3 words. Pauline heard them and felt her shoulders drop. Not from relief, but from the release of a tension she'd been carrying for 6 days and hadn't noticed until it left, the way you don't notice a headache until it stops. 11 jars sold by noon. The woman in the athletic jacket brought 2 friends. A man who'd been buying beet every week brought his mother, who tasted the carrot ginger honey, batch number 8, the 9 out of 10, and stood still for a moment with the fork in the air, chewing with her eyes half closed. This is extraordinary, she said, which was not a word Pauline had ever heard applied to a jar of carrots, and which she wrote in the notebook that evening in quotation marks, because some words belong to the people who say them. The weeks settled into rhythm. Saturdays at the market, 25 to 30 jars, selling 15 to 20. Phone orders midweek from regulars. Pauline kept the notebook updated. Which flavours moved, which sat, when to drop a batch that didn't sell. Turmeric, gone after 4 weeks of single-digit sales. When to scale one that did. Carrot ginger honey, doubled production after the 3rd sellout. The notebook, which had started as a recipe diary, now held margins full of business observations written in the same small lab handwriting. Saturday number 8. Honey version outsells plain 3 to 1. Raise price to $14? Test next week. She tested. $14. Nobody blinked. The honey version moved just as fast, and the extra $2 per jar was invisible to the buyer, but visible to Pauline. At 20 jars a week, that was $40 extra, nearly half a week of Tyler's tutoring, earned by adding 15 grams of honey to a recipe and writing 14 on the sign instead of 12. End of 3rd month. Gross about $400 a week from market and orders combined. Minus ingredients, bought bulk from a wholesale produce vendor, cheaper per pound, better consistency. Booth fee, 25 per Saturday. Bus fare, replacement jars, breakage, 2 to 3 per month, each one a small, expensive crunch in the canvas tote. And 3 batches lost to spoilage. Over-fermented, cloudy, off-taste, discarded without negotiation because standards exist and Pauline's were lab grade. After all deductions, net about $800 a month. $800. Plus combined social security, $26.60. Tyler's tutor, minus $400. Pauline paid every month, on time, and Lena had stopped asking, where from? Because the answer was always, from carrots, and from carrots had become a family shorthand for, don't question it. Vicks knee cream, the one insurance wouldn't cover, $65 a month. Bought. And the cream smelled of menthol, and the menthol mixed with the fermentation smell in the apartment, creating what Pauline privately called the scent of solvency, which was not pleasant, but was better than the scent of going without. Vic noticed. Not in words. Vic didn't do words about feelings, but in actions. He stopped saying nonsense, stopped closing the kitchen door with a sigh. One Saturday, without being asked, he picked up the 2 canvas totes, £10 each, and carried them to the bus stop. Heavy, Pauline. You put rocks in these. But he carried them. At the market, he stood beside her, and when a customer asked, "What's this?" he answered before Pauline could. "Fermented vegetables. My wife makes them. Live bacteria. Try the carrot. It's the best." Pauline looked at him and said nothing. Because if she said anything, he'd get embarrassed and stop. And while she was quiet, he kept talking. And every word he said was worth more than any label. Because this was Vic, who for 43 years had said nonsense and suddenly was saying, "Try the carrot, it's the best." Lena came in February, with Tyler on break. Tyler hugged his grandmother and said, "Grandma, my practice scores went up 20 points." And Pauline hugged him back and thought, 20 points equals 4 jars of carrot ginger, equals $48, equals 2 Saturday mornings of standing in booth 27 while a teenager in Zanesville learned the quadratic formula because his grandmother had fermented vegetables. Lena walked into the kitchen, saw the jars, the notebook, the labels, the permit taped inside the cover. Picks up a jar of carrot ginger honey, turned it, read the back. "Mum, you have a permit number." "And pH test results." "Mum, this is real." It was always real, Lena. It just didn't have paperwork. Lena looked at her mother, and in her face Pauline saw the recalibration, the picture updating, the old frame, mum on a pension, can't afford cold cuts, being replaced by a new one, mum with a cottage food permit and a lab notebook. And the new frame fitting better, and Lena not saying, "I'm sorry," because Lena didn't know how, but saying, "This is real," which was close enough. Morning, kitchen. On the windowsill, 12 jars of the new batch, and among them the original airlock jar, the $18 one, the first, the one that started everything. Now it wore a label. Marsh ferments, carrot plus ginger plus honey, handcrafted, live culture. Beside it, the notebook, open to the last entry. Batch number 14, carrot plus ginger plus honey, 1 kilogram, 0.18 grams salt, 0.10 grams ginger, 0.15 grams honey, 0.4 days at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Market. Sold 8 in 2 hours. Repeat. And below, in fresh ink, this morning's line, batch number 15, carrot plus turmeric plus black pepper. Experiment. Because a scientist who's found a formula doesn't stop experimenting. The experiments are only beginning. To wrap up this story, let's look at what Pauline did to reach her goals and cover her needs. What did Pauline do? She stood in a kitchen with an empty fridge and combined Social Security that didn't cover the month. Instead of asking for help, she looked at 6 jars on a windowsill and saw not a hobby, but a product. Started with 12 jars at a farmer's market, sold 3 the first Saturday and built from there. Testing flavours, tracking sales in a lab notebook, adjusting recipes by data, not by guess. 3 lessons. First, write everything down. Pauline's notebook was her most valuable tool, more important than any jar. Ratios, temperatures, what sold, what didn't, what customers asked for. When you record, you see patterns. When you see patterns, you make decisions. Turmeric dropped, garlic added, honey tested, each choice backed by numbers. Second, the document turns a hobby into a business. A cottage food permit and a pH certificate costs $70, 6 jars of carrots. Without them, no market. With them, legal, documented, unchallenged. $70 was the price of working in daylight instead of looking over her shoulder. Third, your professional language is your edge. When Pauline said 10 to the 6th per gram, the customer heard a scientist, not a grandmother with jars. 31 years of lab vocabulary made her product different from every other jar of pickled vegetables on the table, because her jars came with proof. And proof is what people pay $12 for instead of $3. Every kitchen has a skill someone will pay for. Jam, pickles, bread, dried herbs, fermented anything. Write in the comments, what do you make? Hit that like button so this story reaches the people who need it right now. And subscribe. Every week we share stories of people who stopped being embarrassed and started earning with what their hands already knew.